let's go on with Acts chapter 16. So I am going to take a moment to read with you Acts chapter 16.
What translation do you use?
I am using the Complete Jewish Bible as I read to you each week, just in case you were wondering. What are some of the other translations that you guys use? I have not asked in a long time, but I mean, are you getting, yeah, Angela?
New American Standard.
New American Standard, the old trustworthy.
ESV.
ESV, also a good one.
Scriptures.
The Scriptures, TS 2009 version of the Scriptures. I do like that one as well. That's the one I read with my kids. Yeah. So some people read King James. It's all good, but I do like this one. The Complete Jewish Bible. Yep. David Stern, I believe that is. Good stuff. Anyway, Acts chapter 16. Here we go. So Shaul came down to Derbe and went on to Lystra, where there lived a disciple named Timothy. He was the son of a Jewish woman who had come to faith, and a Greek father. All the brothers in Lystra and Iconium spoke well of Timothy, and Shaul wanted Timothy to accompany him, so he took him and did a circumcision on him because of the Jews living in those areas, for they all knew that his father was Greek. As they went on through the towns, they delivered to the people the decisions reached by the apostles and the elders in Jerusalem for them to observe. Accordingly, the congregations were strengthened in the faith and increased in number day by day. They traveled through the region of Phrygia and Galatia because they had been prevented by the Holy Spirit from speaking the message in the province of Asia. When they came to the frontier of Mysia, they tried to go into Bithynia, but the Spirit of Yeshua would not let them. So after passing by Mysia, they came down to Troas. There, a vision appeared to Shaul at night. A man from Macedonia was standing and begging him, "Come over to Macedonia and help us." As soon as he had seen the vision, we lost no time getting ready to leave for Macedonia, for we concluded that God had called us to proclaim the good news to them. And sailing on from Troas, we made a straight run to Samothrace. The next day we went to Neapolis, and from there we went on to Philippi, a Roman colony and the leading city of that part of Macedonia. We spent a few days in this city. Then on Shabbat, we went outside the gate to the riverside, where we understood a gathering, a minyan, was meeting. Now we went down and began speaking to the women who had gathered there. One of those listening was a woman from the city of Thyatira named Lydia, a dealer in fine purple cloth. She was already a God-fearer, and the Lord opened up her heart to respond to what Shaul was saying. After she and the members of her household had been baptized, she gave us this invitation: "If you consider me to be faithful to the Lord, come and stay in my house." And she insisted till we went. Once, when we were going to the place where the minyan was gathered, we were met by a slave girl who had in her a snake spirit that enabled her to predict the future. She earned a lot of money for her owners by telling fortunes. This girl followed behind Shaul and the rest of us and kept screaming, "These men are servants of God Ha-Elyon. They're telling you how to be saved." She kept this up day after day until Shaul, greatly disturbed, turned and said to the spirit, "In the name of Yeshua the Messiah, I order you to come out of her." And the spirit did come out at that very moment. But her owners saw that what had come out of her was the further prospect of profit for them. So they seized Shaul and Sila and dragged them to the market square to face the authorities. Bringing them to the judges, they said, these men are causing a lot of trouble in our city since they are Jews. What they are advocating is advocating customs that are against the law for us to accept or practice since we are Romans. The mob joined in the attack against them, and the judges tore their clothes off of them and ordered that they be flogged. After giving them a severe beating, they threw them into prison, charging the jailer to guard them securely. And upon receiving such an order, he threw them into the inner cell and clamped their feet securely between heavy blocks of wood. Around midnight, Shaul and Sila were praying and singing hymns to God, while the other prisoners were listening attentively. Suddenly there was a violent earthquake that shook the prison to its foundations. All the doors flew open and everyone's chains came loose. The jailer awoke, and when he saw the doors were thrown open, he drew his sword and was about to kill himself, for he assumed that the prisoners had escaped. But Shaul shouted, "Don't harm yourself, we're all here." Calling for lights, the jailer ran in, began to tremble, and fell down in front of Shaul and Sila. Then, leading them outside, he said, "Men, what must I do to be saved?" And they said, "Trust in the Lord Yeshua, and you will be saved, you and your household." Whereupon they told him and everyone in his household the message about the Lord. Then, even at that late hour of the night, the jailer took them and washed off their wounds, and without delay he and all his people were immersed. After that, he brought them up to his house and set food in front of them, and he and his entire household celebrated their having come to trust in God. The next morning, the judges sent police officers, with the order, "Release those men." And the jailer told Shaul, "The judges have sent word to release both of you, so come on out and go your way in peace." But Shaul said to the officers, "After flogging us in public, when we hadn't been convicted of any crime, and are Roman citizens, they threw us in prison. Now they want to get rid of us secretly? Oh no, let them come and escort us out themselves." So the officers reported these words to the judges, who became frightened when they heard that Shaul and Sila were Roman citizens. They came and apologized to them. Then, after escorting them out, requested them to leave the city. And from the prison they went to Lydia's house, and after seeing and encouraging the brothers, they departed. That's quite a tale of an epic adventure, isn't it? Now, I want to bring something to your attention. This is not necessarily part of my notes, but you note here that there's a change in the narrative structure of the book of Acts at this point. Did anybody catch what it was? Or you probably already know this if you're a student of the Bible. Yeah. Yeah, the narrative structure changes slightly in this section of the book of Acts. It goes from they did this and he said that and they went over here and did that to first person pronouns, I and we. This lets you know that somewhere right here in the story is when the author, Luke, actually became friends with Paul and Sila and began to travel with them. So that's how I mean the structure of the narrative changes from all third-person pronouns to second and first-person pronouns because Luke is now a part of the story. Prior to this, he was getting his information from people who were witnesses in order to put together his narrative for Theophilus. But now he's a part of the missionary journeys from here on out. And so from here to the end of this book, you'll see him continuously saying, we did this and we did that. So it's just an interesting insight into the structure of this book. And it also, I think, gives us some more surety in the veracity, the trustworthiness of this author, as he is a first-person witness. Prior to this, he was a faithful reporter, I think. If you want to say that Luke is a journalist who's, he's not creating fake news like today, but he's a journalist who I think was faithful in going around and meeting the witnesses who were there and saw these things and gave us a faithful accounting of what happened. But now he's part of the story, which is even that much better. And I think this gives us a really good insight into especially Paul. especially Paul. That we need to have a good, clear understanding of Paul, and this is how you're going to do it. By reading the book of Acts and getting this good insight into who he is and what he believed. You'll get that more than anywhere else, is much insight into Paul in the book of Acts. Fair enough? Awesome. So I wanted to take just a moment I love maps. I don't know if you guys do, but I'm always a huge fan of maps. I know you can't see this really well, but it's fairly large. You can see that they started their journey here and went up the western coast of Syria and began to hug the shoreline there until they got up into the region of Galatia. But just take note of something that's interesting here. Note that they said that the Spirit of God precluded them from going to Asia. Now, in our day and age, when we think of Asia, we're thinking the Far East. Yeah, the other side of the world. I don't think that that's not what they were talking about when Paul had it in his mind. Let's go to China and witness there. No, this is called Asia at that time. Right today we call it what? Turkey, but it was literally Asia Minor. Today we call it Asia Minor, and we think of Asia as the other side of the planet, way over there. But what's interesting is I want to point out to you something that's curious about this, and I just want you to keep this in your mind as we move forward, and we'll talk about this in just a little bit. Notice that where they go and where they don't go. They are skirting through Derbe. They probably went to Tarsus, which is Paul's hometown, then went to Derbe and Lystra, Pisidian Antioch, skirted around Asia because the Spirit of God's precluded them from going here. It looks like they would have veered off into Bithynia, but the Spirit of Yeshua prevented them from going there. So they continued here and then ended up in Troas, then sailed across to Samothrace, and then went into Macedonia. They're in southeast Europe at this point, in the Macedonian colonies, and they end up in Philippi.
That is strange.
What's that?
That's strange.
It is. Well, you know what's strange about it is that they've bypassed all of this. I know you can't probably see that very well, but what are the cities that are in Asia? Laodicea, Philadelphia, Pergamum, Sardis. It's the churches that are in the book of Revelation. Now, we'll talk about that in a little bit. It's an interesting side note. Smyrna, those different places that are all in John's Revelation are the ones that these guys are not permitted to go to, which is just interesting. So then they come around and head back the southern route. And in the next couple of chapters, we'll get more information about what happens in Berea and Athens and Corinth, and that's where things get even more interesting. But I just wanted to give you a brief overview of Paul's second missionary journey. Do you have any questions regarding that? Yes, sir.
Is that Colossae? Isn't that where Paul writes from prison?
Right here?
Yeah.
Paul
Yeah.
writes from prison?
No. Is that Colossae then?
That is Colossae.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So they did go to Ephesus. They did go to Ephesus on the way back, but were precluded from going to those other places. Just interesting. So the stage is now set for some rapid expansion. The gospel message is going far and wide. This second missionary journey is taking them pretty far afield. You know, what is the farthest that Paul ever went in his life? Rome. Yep. I think he had intended to go. Where did he say that he wanted to go? Does anybody remember that?
Farthest place? Gosh, I can't remember the farthest.
You are very close. He intended to go to Spain. What do we call Spain today? Yeah. He never made it there, though. Anyway, here we go with some rapid expansion. Now, I want to say briefly that here is where we stand right now before we launch into this, because this is where things start to change rapidly. There really is no Christianity as we know it in our minds at this point. This is just a sect of Judaism that is infighting, probably not getting along real well. This is going to become divisive, okay? But right now, there's not Christianity as we know it, not the way we think of it. The Gentiles are turning to God, and the salvation that is offered in the Messiah Yeshua is being spread far and wide. The Gentiles are adopted into the family of God without conversion, which is that issue of ritual circumcision as an act of converting to Judaism. That is the Jerusalem Council's agreement that they came up with, is no, the Gentiles don't need to convert to Judaism in order to be saved and become adopted into the family of God. The Gentiles can fellowship in the synagogue on the Sabbath day, provided they follow those 4 rules that we've been going over to keep themselves from ritual impurity. What are the 4 rules? Anyone can spit them out real quick?
No trade, no idols, no sexual immorality, and no something else.
Blood. Good job, Jimmy.
The blood.
Good job. That is correct. That is correct. Now, you got to know that a schism is inevitable. It's coming. These guys are on a different path. They believe that Messiah Yeshua is the Messiah, and a bulk of the Jews are not going to believe so. And Yeshua, I was reminded in reading the Gospel of John this week as part of another study that you're going to get kicked out of the synagogues. That Yeshua warned of that in the Gospel of John, that they're going to kick you out of the synagogues because you believe in me. And we shouldn't forget that, because for now there's just enough confusion and not really knowing exactly what's going on where we haven't had quite an opportunity to really divide ourselves very much within these sects of Judaism. But it's coming. It's coming. There's going to be a schism, and you're going to eventually, pretty shortly, I think, here, get yourself some Messianic synagogues, and then you're probably going to have some Gentiles who are deciding, you know what, this is just not working out real well, and they're going to set up some house churches, and it's just that the schism is coming. The schism is coming, so just be aware of that. Now, just briefly, we don't need to speculate about the things that I have mentioned right here. This is not my supposition, because you can read in Acts chapter 21, and I want you to go there for just a second, to take a look at Acts chapter 21 and see what is said here, because it's quite fascinating. And we'll start at about 17, I think. Acts 21, 17, 18. It says, "And when we had arrived in Jerusalem, the brothers received us gladly." And this is Paul and Timothy and Silas and Luke, who is writing. There he is with that "we" again. "When we arrived in Jerusalem, the brothers received us gladly. And on the following day, Shaul went in with us to Jacob," that is the brother of Yeshua, "and all of the elders came, and having greeted them, he was relating one by one what God had done among the nations through his service. And when they heard it, they praised the master. And they said to him, 'You see, brother, how many tens of thousands of Jews there are who have believed, and who are all zealous for the Torah. But they have been informed about you, that you teach all of the Jews who are living among the nations to forsake Moses, saying not to circumcise the children, nor to walk according to the practices. What then are we to do? They shall certainly hear that you have come. So do this, what we say to you.'" And they go on to tell him to take this vow and go into the temple to complete his sacred vow that he had made, and to go along with these additional people and to help pay their way, so that the people would know that there is nothing, if you continue on the next sentence there, so that they will know that there is nothing to these false reports that are going around about you. So this gives us a good insight, and that's at the end of the book of Acts, into exactly what I have been talking about here. Just as a little bit of a heads up. And when we get to that, Acts chapter 1, we'll dig into that a little bit deeper. But that I encourage you to read Acts chapter 21, maybe in advance, to see what's going on here, because it gives you a lot of wisdom and insight. So now, yes, sir.
The schism, what was that more caused by? Because they believed in Yeshua as the Messiah? They did in the first century, Rabbi
Yeah.
Akiva did, or was it because the traditions?
I think it's a combination of both. We don't have any hard and fast evidence regarding what those actionable offenses were, so to speak, but I think we can safely assume that it's definitely the fact of believing that Yeshua is the Messiah. I think that's the key thing right there. That is the major issue, because that's the major issue today, frankly. I mean, if and I know that some of you have seen perhaps Michael Brown debate with rabbis, or you've seen a rabbi debating a Christian, and they always say the same thing. If the Jews were to recognize, like we have recognized here in this fellowship and others like it all over the planet, that the Torah is valid and that we're supposed to be doing it, then what's left for the Jews to object to? Yeshua as the Messiah. Because if you take away their objection and say, we apologize, we've made some serious mistakes and have offended you guys and slaughtered you and done stupid things for a couple thousand years now, but we now recognize that we really should have been doing the Torah all this time, and no, the Messiah did not come to nail the Torah of Moses to a tree. There's been a huge misunderstanding. That would change things dramatically, and all of the objections that they have to Christianity would evaporate. Mm-hmm. Most of them, aside from the issue of Jesus being the Messiah, but a large reason that they don't think he's the Messiah is because we tell them that he came to do away with the Torah, and they can't accept that. So that would be my answer to that question. They can't. Exactly. They can't accept that. And that makes sense. So now, the background of Timothy and what is a Jew. This little episode here where Paul decides to circumcise Timothy is a big, contentious issue. And no one really seems to understand, wait a minute, we just had the Jerusalem Council that says that circumcision is not required. Why would he go and circumcise Timothy, who's kind of like a half-breed or something? He's half Jew and half Gentile. That doesn't make any sense. Why would Paul, of all people, circumcise Timothy? Darren?
Because they're going to be around a large Jewish population. It was just more so it wasn't a stumbling block.
That seems, and you know what? That's pure speculation, and I tend to agree with that, because that is the common.
The context is because of the Yehudim.
Yeah, it's clearly because of the Jews, but that brings up the issue of Paul certainly doesn't have any qualms about standing up to the Jews in other parts of the New Testament saying, no. But this is in relation to Titus, which is a bit of a different situation. But then you might say, well, what does God have two different standards? Are you going to try to say, well, God says it's okay for Jews to be circumcised, but not for Gentiles? It gets a little confusing, and if you read the Christian commentaries on this passage, it causes not a small amount of consternation on the part of the authors trying to figure out. Some people say that Paul was being hypocritical. I read two of the church fathers this week who made some very confusing statements saying that Paul was confused and that he was performing a circumcision in order to do away with circumcision. Just some really weird commentary that didn't make a whole lot of sense. But I think that if we explore this issue just a little bit, we can gain some insight. I don't know that we're going to come away with a definitive conclusion because it's a thorny issue to me. But I would ask you this. First of all, what is a Jew?
Which definition?
That's what I'm saying. What is the definition of a Jew? Is it a race? Is it a religion? Is it an ethnic group? Is it a nationality?
It's all three today.
Well, consider this. When when Israel, Jacob, left Uncle Laban's house and he went through Shechem, and his two sons, Shimon and Levi, wiped out that village of Shechem, the text tells us that they took the women and the children of Shechem for themselves. You realize how that would have affected the people group of the Jews at that time?
Gene pool?
It would have severely changed the gene pool. All of the women and some adopted children were not Hebrews at all, were not of the same heritage. You also have to consider that people had continuously, remember Abraham, even going back to Abraham, he had how many people in his household?
318.
318 people in his household who were, from what we understand, adopted into his clan, so to speak. We also know that when the children of Israel left Egypt, what went with them? A mixed multitude, a lot of people. So this is clearly not a racial group. It's a very mixed up, you might call it a mutt in today's terminology. That's a mutt. It's not a pure breed. So for a Jew to say, and I get this all the time, when people see my seat or something, they just naturally assume that I'm a Jew, and they say, "Are you Jewish?" And I'm like, well, that's a great question. What is a Jew? Do you mean, is my mother Jewish? Was I born and raised Jewish? No. Are you Jewish? Yes, I am. My mother and father were Jewish. We were raised in Israel. Well, let me tell you this. From a biblical perspective, I'm more Jew than you are, because I observe the commandments and I worship this God of the Bible. You may be a pure-blooded Jew who's born in Israel, but you don't worship this God at all. So according to Paul, I'm more a Jew than you are. But I wouldn't, of course, say that to anybody. I wouldn't say that to anybody. But what is a Jew? Frankly, anyone, we've talked about this briefly before, but can one convert to Judaism today?
Sure.
Yeah. You can convert to Judaism today. If you get a circumcision and you get baptized and you go through this ritual process, you can become a Jew. And from that point on, you are legally and in every sense of the word a Jew. Period. Doesn't matter where you're from. If you convert to Judaism, you become a Jew. You can go to Israel and become a legal citizen of the state of Israel, provided you convert to Judaism. So what is a Jew? That's a big question.
I would say it's from Romans chapter 2.
Mm-hmm.
It says, but a Jew is he who is so inwardly, and circumcision is that of the heart,
Yep.
the spirit, not literally, whose praise is not from men, but from Elohim.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I would say, for those of you who are followers of the God of Israel, circumcised or not, who are observing his instructions and trying to walk in his path, you are a Jew, according to Paul, more than somebody who was born and raised Jewish and doesn't follow God. Now, do I want to say that everybody's a Jew? No, that's not what I mean. Paul said it, but I think it's an interesting insight. Angela?
It almost seems that's like what he started this whole chapter wanting us to ask, is what is a Jew? Because he gives us this guy who's half Jewish, half Greek, and he circumcises it. And our question would naturally be, what is a Jew?
Mm-hmm.
And we would think of things like where they're from or who their mother is, but really what it's about, if you go back, it's about the seed of Abraham.
Right.
And the seed of Abraham would behave like Abraham, correct?
Bingo.
Look at the two women in this story. The first woman that's mentioned, Lydia, her heart opens, and what does she do? The same thing Abraham does, hospitality.
There you go. Good insight. Good insight.
I think he's telling us, you are being so physically minded, and you're thinking of DNA.
Yeah.
And you're thinking of where
You're thinking in the flesh. Yeah.
You're thinking of the flesh, but the seed I'm talking about is not the flesh seed. The seed of Abraham
Right.
is bigger than that. It's a spiritual thing, and you guys need to open up a little bit and quit being so human about this.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
by circumcising Timothy, he just took that issue off the table. Deal with the rest of it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that's
Think
the
about this.
whole point.
Yeah.
That's a good insight, good wisdom and insight. And I think that's about as good an explanation about why Paul did what he did that you're going to get. Is right there, Jimmy, that it doesn't get any better than that. That the circumcision issue needed to be removed and taken out of the way, because is Timothy technically a Jew from a rabbinical perspective? Yes, he is, because he has a Jewish mother. Now, why would, in Judaism, they say, if your mother's Jewish, then you're Jewish, but if your father is Jewish and your mother is not, you're not? Why would they say that?
Questionable patrimony.
Well, that's possible. But why would they give weight to the woman instead of the man? Where's that in the Bible? Is it in the Bible?
Complete mistake.
What are your thoughts about that? Do you have any ideas about why Jews would trace matrilineal descent instead of patrilineal descent? I think if you think about it from just a practical consideration, that gives you some wisdom and insight into what the deal is here. But there's also a chapter in the Bible which gives some insight about this that we'll take a look at here. Number one, who's responsible for raising the children? It's the mother. The mother is most often, in most cultures, responsible for raising the children. And if the mother is raising the children, then her values and her perspective on religious issues is the one that is inculcated into the children. And so I think that that's part of it, is the nurturing spirit of a mother who is infusing into her children a love for God and for His scriptures and such. And you can see that in the book of 2 Timothy when he says, you have known the scriptures from your childhood, because your grandmother and your mother had taught it to you. So that's one issue right there. Angela?
I'm thinking, I don't know quite how to put my finger on it, but you have this idea of God being Father in this equation, spiritually, and that the mother thing, the female is spiritual. And so you can be of the seed of Abraham. You can be that from that father and still not be, when he says, I'll raise up stones, still not be.
Still not be what?
Well, part of the family, I guess.
How would you say that is so?
Just because you're descendants of Abraham does not mean it's that whole physical thing. They're thinking just because we can trace our lineage, we must be in.
Are you making a sexist comment?
No, I'm talking about there's two components here. It's not about you being physically descended from.
Yeah.
It's the spirit. Again, it's the same thing I just said. I'll just shut up.
No, I totally agree with you, and I think that there's clear evidence that a woman is a more spiritual creature, and that a man is more of a physical creature, and that there is that perspective. I totally agree with that. Jimmy?
I got one thing to say.
One thing and one thing only.
It's I'm probably going to catch some heat for this.
Oh, goodness. Use wisdom, Jimmy. Wisdom and discernment. I'm rooting for you, buddy.
Okay, we all know that Mary was
A little lamb? No, had.
probably the best woman that was alive on the planet at that time.
What makes you think so?
Well, God chose a godly vessel to be the mother of the Messiah.
Okay, fair enough.
But we see later on that she wasn't perfect. She said, he's been crazy like this for a long time. I'm talking about Jesus, that he was getting in trouble. And he's like, he's been nuts, cuckoo, don't kill him, don't stone him. So we know she was a sinner. And so Jesus was not a sinner. If he had gotten his sinless perfection as a human being from his mother, that was an impossibility because she definitively was a fallen creature.
Sure. I'm sure he got some fantastic instruction from her.
Therefore, he did not get his human spirit from her. So it's a logical step to realize that no child gets their human spirit from their mother, but from their father. Going back to Adam, who is damned in the classical sense, not in the
Sure.
pejorative sense.
Okay.
So it is the father that gives a slain, sin-killed spirit to his child.
Okay, so you're talking about the Father from heaven and not Joseph, obviously.
Yeah. But I mean, my son is destined for hell unless he gets salvation.
Sure.
Because he inherited like a birth defect. It's not his fault. I have like a birth defect that I gave him.
Yeah.
And he's got to deal with that. And I had to deal with the one I got from my dad.
Sure.
And so in order to step around that and circumvent it, God said, I'm going to send, Joseph's going to have nothing to do with this, and I'm going to send my Holy Spirit, and that's going to cause an impregnation with a virgin, so that the spirit that Messiah inherits is going to be absolutely viable and powerful and fully alive, whereas the one you were born with was broken.
Well,
needed to be.
You're hitting on some powerful and mysterious things.
Am I in trouble?
No. I think it's
a lot of them want to think it's all me. He's the sperm donor, but it was me. That is my baby.
Now you're in trouble.
Now I'm in trouble. I just crushed it. But I have a biblical reason for it.
No, I think that's a good insight, and I think you're hitting on powerful and mysterious things that have to do with the divine nature of the Messiah, which is really powerful and challenging. Brianna?
That makes sense to me what you said, because why couldn't it just be Joseph that got her pregnant with?
Sure.
That's going back to Adam.
Yeah, absolutely.
God said, in the day you eat thereof, you will surely die.
Yeah.
They didn't fall over dead, but they unplugged who they were from the throne room of God, and they just wrecked it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting. So I would encourage you in regards to Timothy and what is a Jew and this matrilineal descent thing and who his parents were. Was his father dead? Were his mother and father even married? Was his father a Greek who raped his mother? We don't know. We don't know anything about Timothy's father. We know literally nothing. Now, does it matter about matrilineal descent? Not really. But if you want to have an interesting little bit of insight into that, you can take a look at Ezra chapter 10. I think that we're not going to have time to look more carefully at that this evening. But I encourage you to take a look at that, because there, and I'll just briefly summarize it for you, when they came back from Babylon, they said, we have greatly sinned because we married Gentile women and we had children with them, and they resolve amongst themselves to send away their Gentile wives and their children. They sent them packing. They sent their Gentile wives and their children who were brought forth from those Gentile women. They sent them packing.
Who did that?
Ezra and the congregation of Israel when they left Babylon.
That's a contentious issue.
That is a highly contentious issue. Okay, hold on. Slow down, everyone. Don't freak out. What's that, Angela?
So doesn't that seem like kind of a metaphor?
It kind of does. And what would you mean by that?
Send the Gentiles and their children packing.
Now,
This isn't for you.
elaborate just a little bit.
What Acts is trying to show is that bring them back.
Mm-hmm.
You're a part of this thing. But it's like,
Fixing it.
that seems like a metaphor for you aren't of us, so go.
Yeah.
You don't get this.
Yeah. That's an interesting idea, and I definitely like that. I understand, I think, why Ezra and Nehemiah did that when they left Babylon, because they had been instructed not to marry Gentile women because they would be turned away to the gods of these Gentile women, and they thought that they were doing the right thing by purifying themselves of this, influence, which is certainly possible. Is it the spiritual thing to do? I don't know who these women were and under what circumstances they had been married and what kind of influence they may have already exerted on the community. I really have no idea. They were doing, obviously, the best that they thought they should do.
Point. The mothers Rachel and Leah brought the idols with them.
They
when
did.
They left Babylon. So shame on them for getting rid of their wives. They should have said, no, Rachel and Leah, we're going to get rid of these idols.
We're going to get rid of the idols.
In Babylon.
There you go.
We're going to cross over.
I think that would have been a better way to do that. I do. I think there would have been a better way to do that. And I think Angela's insight of sending away these Gentiles and their children, and then now we're gathering them back. But isn't it fascinating that this whole idea of division and unity, as we see in the opening chapters of the Bible, is such a key part of God's plan of separating the earth, the water and the sea, the water and the land, separating the waters above from the waters below, and then they bring them back together. I mean, that's such a keen insight. Angela?
I think the point of it is multiplication. If you look
Yes.
at how he separated Adam into two, brought those two back together so they could have children and multiply.
Yeah.
I think that might be the purpose of the separation. Because you think, why is he doing this? Why is he dividing?
Yeah.
It's so that he can bring back together and multiply, because he is a God about multiplication.
Absolutely.
From the very beginning, he said, let's make lots of them.
Let's make lots of them. Yeah, absolutely. Good insight. Good insight. So take a look at Ezra 10. It's quite interesting. And then Eunice and Lois is Timothy's mother and grandmother. Likely not religious. Some people say likely not religious, or she wouldn't have married a Greek to begin with. But then 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 15 tells us that he had been raised from his grandmother and mother to be immersed in the Scriptures. So I don't know. Maybe they were immersed in the Scriptures as a part of a more... it's possible. It occurred to me that maybe Timothy's mother and grandmother were religious in a sense that you guys are religious, that you're not a part of some major organization and you're not doing things the way everybody else is in the major congregations. You love the Lord and you follow the Scriptures. Now, why wasn't he circumcised as a child? Everyone surmises that it's because his dad was a Greek and wouldn't permit him to be circumcised. We don't have any evidence in the text anywhere to suggest that. But it's interesting that Paul gives us in his letter to Timothy 3:15 that he was steeped in the Scriptures as a child. So it gives you a possibility that he was from a very religious family, in a sense that was from a spiritual side and not from a fleshly side, or from we're going to strictly obey these commandments. We're going to take things a little bit more spiritual, and we're not going to be a part of the big congregation out there that's doing things in this particular way. It may have been that way. It's just something to think about. Now, the circumcision of Timothy, I think we've pounded that into the ground. There was a lot of confusion about that. I don't think that Paul was being hypocritical, and I think that because of the Jews living in those areas, we've already kind of hit on that and how that might have been an issue that was just taken out of the way. Now, prevented by the Holy Spirit, and the Spirit of Yeshua would not permit them to enter these certain places. That's certainly some interesting stuff. They desired to visit this province of Asia, apparently in central Turkey, but the Spirit would not allow them. And then you've got these 7 letters to the 7 churches. Is this because this is someone else's territory? I mean, that's an interesting thing. Why do you think that God... I mean, this is obviously the province of God, saying, hey, I don't want you going there. But what do you think that there's something we can learn from that? I mean, I don't think it's for no reason that there are 2 mentions of them maybe having in their mind, we were going to go here, but God said no, and then we were going to go there, but God said no. Whenever you see something mentioned twice in a row in the Bible, you should perk up your ears and say, something's going on here. What is it? Now, I don't know that we're meant to know it right now, and it would be some potentially fruitless speculation, but just this added little bit of knowledge that the 7 letters to the 7 churches from the book of Revelation are right there, is just curious to me. Does anyone have any ideas that they would throw out there about why this is mentioned twice and what the deal is with these churches of the book of Revelation being there? Any ideas? None? Angela?
Well, that it's not the end yet. We got another step here in this process of restoration, and that if you look at that woman Lydia, she is from the area they were trying to go to, and they didn't have to go there and find her.
Yes.
God brought her to them.
Yes.
He opened her heart,
Right.
and then she took it back.
Yeah.
And so this is not a physical deliverance of the word. This is a spiritual thing. And I think,
Yeah.
again, it goes back to the whole
Multiplication.
thing, pointing out
Yeah.
that this is not a physical thing. This is a spiritual thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that that's a good point, and especially about Lydia being from Thyatira, which is in the area that they wanted to go through but had been prevented. They meet someone that was in the area that they wanted to go to where they ended up going. I think that is a good piece of wisdom. And I think that this whole passage here gives us some wisdom about walking in the Spirit. I really do. Because it teaches us that we must start walking with our own wisdom and discernment, whatever that is. We have to get this truck moving. You've heard the expression, it's easier to move a vehicle it's easier to steer a vehicle that's already moving. Or, you know what I'm saying? So we have to step out in faith and make our plans to the best of our human wisdom and discernment about how we're going to live our lives and the kind of decisions we're going to make and the kind of route that we're going to travel. We have to do that. We can't just sit back and wait for God to do something. I think that's a recipe for disaster, potentially. You might be severely disappointed if you're not making some plans and moving forward. But you have to be in prayer and guidance and submit yourself to the will of God. And then you must be discerning for the Spirit's prompting to say, don't go there. Do go here. Don't go there. Do go here. So I think that this is a testimony about keeping yourself sensitive to the Spirit of God and listening, but continuing to move forward. We have to always move forward. And I think Paul is a perfect example of just tenacity. Paul is tenacious, if nothing else. I mean, we've seen him repeatedly get the crap kicked out of him and then go right back into the city. I mean, he does this. He does not give up. He is tenacious. But he is very much willing to listen to the Spirit of God and humble himself and say, I got my own plans, but I'm definitely willing to step down and let you guide me. We have to be like that, or we're going to run into brick walls continuously. Do you agree? Yes, I know you do. So just something to keep in mind with that. And then we have this practical example in Philippi where they arrive in the city, they get settled in, and then you go where you suspect the action will be. Where does it say that they went? It says they went to a river outside the city. Now, why would they go to a river outside the city? Why would they go there? They always go to a synagogue, right? Do we have a synagogue mentioned here in Philippi at all? No, we don't. There isn't one. It's likely that there isn't one. There's probably either not enough Jews there, or what do we notice about the attitude towards Jews in this city of Philippi? Yeah, it's not. Did you notice what those people who drugged them through the city and were ready to punish them? These men are causing trouble, being Jews. You notice the attitude? They probably were not terribly welcome here. And they are meeting outside of the city by a river. Why?
No mikvah.
They don't have a mikvah. They don't have a baptismal font. They don't have a place to do baptisms. We know that men and young men and converts and women are getting a mikvah. How often? How often does a woman get a mikvah? Monthly. A man? If you're a convert, we got one right there. If you have one of those nocturnal thingy-majiggers, you're going to be a nocturnal emission, otherwise known as a moist dream. Sorry. Yes, you'll be having a mikveh in that case. So men have a mikveh every once in a while. Men have mikvahs for transitional coming of age type of rites, like for when you're at age 13. So yeah, if you don't have a synagogue, the next best thing is to go to a river outside the city. And Paul and Sila, knowing this, because they're Jews, know it's likely that we're going to find some Jews, if they don't have a synagogue here, outside the city by the river. And sure enough, they put themselves where they know the action will be. They go to the city, they settle in for a couple days and get themselves situated, and then on the Sabbath day, they go where they know the Jews will be. Which is interesting because that's what he always does when he goes to any city. He goes to the Jews first and then to the Greeks. Goes to the Jews first and then to the Greeks. It makes sense because you first of all, that's the principle of multiplication that we've been talking about. You definitely want to, it's definitely much easier to go to someone who has been born and raised in Christianity and say, are you living for the Lord? Are you doing the will of the Lord? And they're like, oh, no. Maybe the Spirit comes down on them and they're feeling that sense of guilt and they're like, you know what, I do need to get my poop in a group, so to speak, and get back on track. It's an easier sell to somebody with a background in Christianity to get back on the right track than it is to go to a Greek and say, hey, let's start fresh. They're going to do that. They're definitely going to do that. But the process of multiplication is easier when you're preaching to the choir. It's just a good first place to go. But for this practical example of walking in the Spirit, arrive at the city, go get settled in, go to where you suspect the action will be. The Spirit provides the words. The Spirit opens the ears of the hearers. It says that Lydia was perking up when she heard the message of Paul, that God was opening up her heart. And also note that Thyatira was a place that they were prohibited from going, and that Lydia is from there. So that this is all working together beautifully as they had their plans, they got thwarted, did what God wanted them to do instead, and what was in their heart, which was to take the message to Asia, happens anyway. Now, the reason I can say this, and I'll get to this in just a second, is in regard to Lydia of Thyatira. What do we know about this person, Lydia? It is likely that she was wealthy. She's from a different city, and what's her job? It says in the text that she is a seller of purple fabric. Now, interestingly, the word fabric is not in the text. It literally says she was a seller of purple. Now, what is that? If you know anything and you've been following the Torah for just a little while, your ears got to be perking up when the text is telling us she's a seller of purple. What does that mean? The
temple is really hard to get. It's really
yes.
Spiritual core.
Yes, it is likely that she is a seller of that dye that was used in those days for building the tabernacle and for dyeing the fabric on these tzitzit a royal purplish blue color. That there was that stuff that techelet. This is what the Hebrew is. It is likely that she was a seller of this really rare and expensive purple dye that is sold to Jews because they have to have it because of their fringes on their robes, and in the temple, and for royalty. This is very expensive stuff.
It's hard to get.
It's hard to get. I don't know if you're aware of this, but they think that it came from these weird little Messianic snails that are only found in and around the Mediterranean Sea. It's very hard to come by, and you have to literally harvest thousands of these snail-like creatures in order to get a pint of that stuff.
Yeah, when it was crushed in the day, it was like glue.
Mm-hmm.
But
crushed it at night for a purple.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting? It's fascinating stuff. So it's likely that Lydia of Thyatira is probably a pretty wealthy woman and an enterprising one. She's a small business person, if you will. And she is traveling quite a ways from home. I mean, if she's from Thyatira, we're talking, that's a good jaunt. That's 500-600 miles away. In those days, that's some serious travel. And if she's a wealthy woman, she probably has a fairly large retinue. And there they find her outside the city of Philippi, down by the river, with the other women probably doing a ritual immersion. Fascinating stuff, isn't it? And she is going to probably take that information, that salvation message that she receives from Paul, and she's going to take it right back to Thyatira where she came from. And this multiplication process is going to start again. Angela?
I'm sorry for harping on this.
You're sorry for harping, you harpy?
Yeah, I'm a harpy.
Go ahead.
As an art major, purple is a combination of red and blue.
Yes.
Red is blood, blue is sky.
The sky, sure.
You got, again, and maybe I'm just seeing things, physical and spiritual married together.
Oh, yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. It's a good insight. I like that. I hadn't thought of that. Thank you. Thank you for that. Now, I want to just spend a moment regarding this woman who is... Your text probably says she had a spirit of divination. My text said a snake spirit. Fascinating, isn't it? I want to just... you know that in a couple of places around the world, they have a miniature version of Stonehenge. Where's the nearest one? Isn't it in Texas? I think there's one in Texas. A miniature version of Stonehenge. You have ever heard of the Oracle of Delphi? You guys ever heard of the Oracle of Delphi? Do you know what that is? If you don't know much about the Greek mythology or whatever, it's quite fascinating. The Oracle of Delphi is a girl. It's a girl, a young girl, who resides in the Greek city of Delphi, where there is the temple of this god that they worship, and this young lady is possessed by a spirit who gives her the ability to tell the future. And travelers will come from all over the world to go to this city of Delphi to pay their money to get insight into some occult thing that they want to know regarding the future.
I thought kings did it too before war.
Oh yeah, kings would go there. Absolutely. This happens all over the Greek world. But the Oracle of Delphi is a really popular one. This is like, if you're going to visit places, you really want to see, the Leaning Tower of Pisa, or the Eiffel Tower or something. That's the Oracle of Delphi is one of the big ones. But in the Greek, when you look at that passage, it talks to you about, it literally says the spirit of a python. That text literally says the spirit of a python. And it's the same spirit that was in the Oracle of Delphi. So they have their own miniature Stonehenge right here in the city of Philippi. They've got a girl that is possessed of the same demonic spirit as the one that is possessing the Oracle of Delphi. And she apparently has a pretty good reputation for being able to tell the future or something, because she's making no small profit for her masters here in the city of Philippi. And Paul, of course, screws it up for these people. But what's fascinating about this thing is that the same thing happens here that happens with Yeshua on a couple of occasions when he casts out a demon. The demon is essentially proclaiming the message of God. These men are from messengers of God Most High, and they are telling you a way of salvation. I mean, isn't that kind of the gospel? The same thing happened when Yeshua would go around to a couple of these spirits, and you would say, what do you have to do with us, Yeshua, the most Son of the Most High God? I mean, they're testifying that Yeshua is the Son of God, and he tells them to shut up. And here Paul does the same thing. You might say, well, gosh, I mean, to get that kind of a testimony, even from demons, well, why not just let her go around yelling?
Demons have no business proclaiming the gospel.
That's a good insight. That's a good insight. For what I think, I don't know what the spiritual takeaway is here, or why Paul felt compelled to do this. It could have been a spiritual compunction by the Spirit. It could have been that he was just irritated, that this was just annoying to have a screaming, demon-infested woman following you around the city yelling this stuff. Don't you just hate that when that happens?
Yeah. Doesn't it say that, though, that it was like she was...
Continuously, yeah, but...
He just was like, okay,
Yeah, that's my impression when I read the text, is that she's just bugging the crap out of him, and he's at the end of it. He's at the end of his rope. He's like, just shut up and come out of her, But apparently they took that very seriously, because I think that was a big moneymaker for them. That she was probably owned by a small consortium of business people. I don't know, but it seems to say in how this shakes out that this is not some guy's slave, because it says that they grabbed him and drugged them in. This is like some kind of a guild or something who owns this slave girl who is part of this. She's got a spirit of the python in her or something. But it also makes me think of what does a python do?
Eat rabbits.
It crushes. It constricts. That's an interesting thing. That's just the word picture that's associated with that is fascinating. Angela?
Because the Mitzrayim means...
Yes, Egypt. The Hebrew word for Egypt is Mitzrayim, which is also constriction, like a python, it's very interesting.
And she has a snake spirit, and it says she's opening her mouth, and isn't that what the snake does?
That's what the serpent does. He opens his mouth and speaks partial truth. Good point. Good point. Yeah, absolutely. So they got themselves into some serious trouble there. So they get arrested. This arrest is obviously clearly illegal, and Paul, on at least 2 occasions that I can think of in the book of Acts alone, gets himself into trouble with the law, and then the lawmen decide, this is just some Jew, we're going to beat the tar out of him, and then he's like, did you realize that I was a Roman citizen? And then they get scared, and it's quite fascinating. So that issue comes up again, and I think we'll deal with that in a little bit more detail when we come to the later chapter of Acts, where he's about to be beaten in the city of Jerusalem by the Roman centurions who capture him there. Then we do have this miraculous intervention where a great earthquake comes and rattles this whole jail system, and all the doors break out. And it's fascinating that the jailer is ready to kill himself. What do you make of that? Why is he ready to kill off himself because of that?
Because the ancient Near East, there's honor and shame. If you lost your prisoners, you shamed your family. The only way to regain honor was to take your own life.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely a part of it. I think it also has to do with the responsibility that is placed upon those kind of people. You can see that when that happens in the city of Jerusalem, when they escape one time, that I think it was Herod who had the guards killed because Peter got away. Because that happened to Peter twice, right? One time he got out, and they were like, what happened to this guy? The second time he got out, the king actually had all of the guards killed because of that. So, yeah, I think it's a big responsibility. And that is not for no reason that the Jewish high priests, when Yeshua was killed, had to talk to these Roman soldiers who were kind of coerced into changing their story about what has happened because they were guarding the tomb and they saw what happened, and so they got bribed to tell people that the disciples of Yeshua came and stole the body in the night. They would have been killed, and I think they had to be protected from the Roman justice by the high priest. So they were probably in collusion and said, hey, look, we don't know what happened to the guy, but we need to say this in order to make it plausible. But, when this jailer sees what happens, he goes and, looks like he falls down on his knees and says to these apostles, what do I have to do to be saved? And you'll see on a couple of occasions in the book of Acts, we have where it says, repent and you and your household will be saved. Now, how do you interpret that, Derek? You and your household will be saved.
I think as the man being the head of the house, the start of the change, hopefully, I think about it in that sense of just the head of the house.
Yeah.
And bleeding into the lives of the people.
Right. I think you're absolutely right, and I don't think that there's any reason to suppose that just because salvation comes through some one person that it's just going to spread, through osmosis or something. No, I think you're absolutely right that when salvation comes into a house, it has a definitive influence on it. Whether it comes through the woman or the man, there's going to be a change. There's going to be an influence. And so there is a high likelihood that it will spread and it will grow. And that's the whole purpose of this thing. So again, there we go. The stage is set for rapid and expansion and unfortunately some division. The same pattern is going to be followed all the way through the book of Acts. We're going to go to the synagogue. We're going to try to reach the Jews and they're going to turn us down. And then we're going to go to the Gentiles and this thing is just going to snowball. And it's going to go like this pretty much through to the end of the book of Acts. That's pretty much it. There is chapter 16. Look at us go. We finished it. I'm so delighted. Any questions, comments, or concerns? Awesome. Let's pray.